Welcome, everybody. This is Gregg Rock, and I wanted to welcome you to the latest version of our Meet the Authors webcast. And we're thrilled today to have Daniel Morrison and Keith Lust with us to talk about a brand new book that's just getting released. As many of you know, we've held many Meet the Author webcasts over the years. And so Dan and Keith, you guys are joining a group of esteemed writers and authors that have been with us before. For a quick note to folks that are joining us for the first time, Brainstorm Group is the parent company of BPM Institute, BA Institute, and DBiz. We'll be celebrating our 25th anniversary next year. And some of the other authors that we featured on this series, the whole series started off actually with an interview with Gary Rumler. Back when we were just getting BPM Institute off the ground. And since then, we featured folks like Tom Dwyer, Andrew Spaney, Jim Siner, Andrew Campbell, James Taylor, Peter Hidalgo, and Bernard Gagnon, and also Matthias Kirchmer. So guys, you're joining good company. And we're going to talk about business and digital transformation in the age of hyperautomation. We're also going to talk a little bit about, why now for this book and what you've written it and what folks are looking to get out of it. And one of the things we're very excited about is this is a BPM Institute exclusive where our members will be the first practitioners in the marketplace to be able to download the book at the end of this webcast. We also have a digital badge for folks who have watched the webcast that I'll give instructions at the end on how you can download that. And so without further delay, let's dive in. Folks that have been in the BPM space for a long time, Dan is a very familiar individual. He's participated in many industry efforts with ABPMP, authoring half a dozen books, spoken at many of the conferences, and serves on several boards throughout the industry. He's also been a frequent contributor to BPMI for many years. And Keith Lust joins us from a background where he headed up at Motorola University. He spent over 25 years focused on business transformation and was in the consulting practice at both Andersen, Ernst & Young, and Oracle. And is also part of speaking at many industry events, authored 4 books of his own. So guys, we're thrilled to have you join us today. I think the book is especially timely. Many of folks that came to us back in the day and continue to come to us for BPM training are finding themselves involved in transformation projects and digital transformation, RPA, a whole host of new areas. And so I think the timing is excellent to give folks an idea of some of the things that are coming down the pike if they're not already involved in them. And so congratulations on bringing the book to market, and appreciate you guys coming down to give some insight to our members and providing them with the book as well. And so the title of the book again is Business and Digital Transformation in the Age of Hyperautomation, Coloring Outside the Lines. Why it's important now, what is hyperautomation, what is advanced technology, and how do we get to hypertransformation? So these are all great questions and very timely. And so I'm going to turn things over to Dan Morris.
Thank you, Greg. And I'd like to also welcome everybody who's joined us today. And we're going to start out by looking at a little bit of history and the situation that we find ourselves in as we start to look at the expansion of what tools and what techniques are now rolling into a term that we call hyperautomation. Part of the history, and we'll look at pre-COVID here just for a second, is that our environments, our technology environments, and business environments also, have been evolving, but as they've been evolving, they've been deteriorating. And we've reached a point where both of them are in trouble in a great many companies. The result of that was a move to bring in continuous improvement and try to leverage Six Sigma and Lean. And that was a great step. It took us quite a bit down the road. But when we started to look at what was going on in companies and started to look at processes as opposed to individual smaller problems, those techniques and those technologies really didn't work any longer. So as we continued to move forward, we ran into a big problem when we hit COVID. And COVID not only literally shut down the business world to a large degree, it had a great impact on hyperautomation and hyperautomation products. Because as things shut down, companies were scrambling to look at, how do I now move from an office environment to a distributed home-based environment? What types of technologies do we need to do that? How are we going to do that? How's that going to affect how we monitor people, our performance? And the list of questions goes on and on. But we find that the legacy technologies really weren't up to speed to help along those lines, resulting in, especially as you people who are involved in process automation, process transformation, know, because you deal with it every day, is that we wound up putting in a lot of workarounds. Those workarounds then caused their own problems and deteriorated the operation further. Now, we also found that as we were going through this, the ability to change processes really didn't keep up with what the customers were expecting from us, which caused a whole nother shift in this thing that we looked at called customer journey. So if we look at IT support, which is often considered to be inadequate when you talk to the business side, we say, what are we going to do about that? Well, we know that the legacy systems are continuing to deteriorate. Total cost of ownership is going up and capabilities erode. That caused a real move towards transformation and hyper-automation technologies to help in those transformations. Greg, slide. Keith, this one is yours.
Yep. All right. Thank you. Hi, everybody. I thought we'd take a little bit of a deep dive and really talk about transformation and what we've learned over the years with regards to how business transformation has been conducted and some of the issues and gaps that we find in traditional thinking around business transformation. And as Dan mentioned, we've come up with a kind of the next step or evolution in the business transformation arena, and we're calling that hyper transformation. And what we're really doing is rethinking everything about business transformation so that we can overcome the failure hurdles that have been plaguing organizations to date. And what we're doing is really leveraging technology innovations by defining transformation as a continuous process and integrating into it the hyper automation technologies that are available to us. And as you take a look at this slide, what we've done is step back and said there are really 6 key components that we need to be thinking about in true hyper transformation to really make the changes that we need to make changes in our organizations. And the first is really the space of innovation around technology. And that includes hyperautomation and advanced technologies. And then the other side, we have other aspects which we call the dimensions of business transformation, disruption, business paradigms, and then the architects of transformation. So let's step back and talk about those a little bit and how they kind of come together. So by adopting hyperautomation technologies is really thinking about fundamentally redesigning all the business operations by leveraging technologies that we're all familiar with already: RPA, cognitive computing, machine learning, AI, and other combined solutions to really start thinking about how can we design and manage our business operations in fundamentally new and different ways to deliver a better internal experience as well as an experience for our customers. With regards to advanced technologies, there are all sorts of new technologies that keep on innovating and are a result of the hyperautomation space. Things like autonomous transportation, robotics, medicine, and they're all enabled by cognitive computing, machine learning, and AI. So when we start stepping back and really thinking about the technology and innovation space, we need to understand how do we start to really affect deeper change in our organizations and make that stick in the longer term. The intent here is that we're trying to create capacity for continuously transforming organizations with no end in sight, just new targets. Typically, we find in business and digital transformations, organizations and leaders will say, well, we're here in current state today, and we're going to move to some new future transformed future state. And then we'll stop and kind of figure out where we need to be. Well, given all the massive disruptions that we have been and will continue to face, we can no longer stop. We need to constantly be innovating, constantly transforming our organizations with literally no pause. To do this, we take a much more integrated approach by looking at 4 key dimensions of transformation, which include the business transformation, operational, the organizational, and digital transformation. And by looking at all 4 of those together, we get a much more of a ecosystem view or an integrated view of how to deal with transformation and make it successful. Another key aspect, of course, is disruption. And how do we not only adapt to disruption, but how do we as organizations create disruptions that our competition just can't replicate quickly enough and will quickly fall behind? In addition to that, we've defined business paradigms, which start to articulate specifically what is the business model landscape today and where is it evolving towards? And what are the implications that we need to be thinking about as we define our transformation agenda? And then finally, there are architects of transformation. And these are the professionals who work together to plan, design, and implement the continuous transformation agenda for your organization. And those include folks like the business architect, user experience architects, process architects, organization architects, and of course, technology or enterprise architects. And again, together, they all come together to really drive and ensure the change actually occurs. We cover all of this in detail in our book, as well as examples and tools to help with your hypertransformation journey. That's it. Dan,
All
you're
right,
up.
great, Keith. And Dan, we'll come back to you.
Dan, why don't you take the next topic and delve in a little bit further into hyperautomation and how it connects into this ecosystem that we're describing.
Thank you, Keith. Let's start off by looking at what hyperautomation really is and the family of products that really make up this ecosystem that we call hyperautomation. And hyperautomation really is no single vendor's product. It's no single type of product. We'll get into a little bit later the different types of products that make this up. But the key concept at this point is that it is a family of tools that can be used individually, but are meant to be used together. And when you start to use them together, we start to see things that just a few years ago weren't considered to be possible. Now, as we discussed, COVID expedited the adoption of these technologies. And as horrible as it was in most respects, this was at least one part of a small silver lining that came out of the pandemic, is a recognition and an acceptance of the fact that where we were no longer is good enough to move us into the future and what could happen. Now, these advanced technologies, as they started to be used, have been putting out different capabilities and different tools on an ongoing basis over the past couple of years as they matured from their early product stage to become what we'll look at as industrial capable. And we see different types of tools, different things that we now take for granted. Everything from the way that insurance claims are initially produced, where you now, instead of having an adjuster come out, you just take a picture on your phone. And we see that with Cortana, where you say, Cortana, do something, and it figures out what to do. And a lot of different things that are starting to change our lives in ways that we just accept. We don't even notice anymore. So a lot of those types of things now are being built into other things, so that in the future, we'll be able to have a very different type of a dialogue with computers. And so as we ask questions, as we want to do things, if we, in retail, if we ask, well, do you have any of those in stock, or what size, or what about blue, or where can you do this? It just answers us. And as we start to do that, we start to look at how these technologies work together, we recognize the fact that they're the underlying technologies that allow Tesla to do autonomous vehicles, as an example. Without AI, that just couldn't happen. And a lot of these different things that are happening right now are based on the ongoing enablement of things that were produced now to be used in a different way. That's a very key point, because that's the thing that allows us to evolve our society, our companies, the types of products that we have, and the way that our lives are going to be spent with technology over the years ahead of us. Another very quick example of that that's kind of science fiction, but also kind of neat, is nanotechnologies and the use of nanotechnologies to help us cure different diseases. It's a ways off, but it's coming. If we look at hyper technologies and we look at the advanced technologies that they're able to help us build, we then have to say to ourselves, well, what does this mean to our business? How are we going to transform that business to allow us to take advantage of these tools, their capabilities, and what we're going to bring into the marketplace and how we're going to bring that into the marketplace? That's where hypertransformation comes in. And we look at it as hypertransformation because of the speed that all of these tools are advancing, and the capabilities that all of these tools then are allowing as they leapfrog one another, and as people start to take those capabilities and through innovative ways of doing them, or using them, I should say, come up with new products. The way the companies have to change in order to do that is, first of all, continuous. Second of all, it's fundamental. And third of all, it deals with a questioning on an ongoing basis of every part of that company, from its vision to its strategy, to its future direction, to the processes, and off to the technologies, guiding, and this is an important point, guiding digital transformation. Because in the past, business transformation and digital transformation have both been independent of one another. And we find now in hypertransformation, we have to meld the two. Because strategy defines your business, it sets the framework for your technology. Then the capabilities define how your business is going to work. That then says, this is what I need from IT. So IT can now transform itself in a very focused way. Okay, we'll move on to the next slide now. The foundation for this whole movement, this whole innovation that's happening in not only in industry, but in society itself, is really hyperautomation and the capabilities that the tools in hyperautomation bring to the table, what they make available. It's then up to creative people to innovate and use these tools to change not only companies, but the world. These technologies are enabling. They enable both new ways of thinking about business operations, new ways of thinking about customers, new ways of thinking about production, new ways of looking at interactions with customers, with suppliers, any place in the world. The innovations in customer solutioning that this brings allow people to deal with customers in very different ways. Some of it that we've already seen deal with, you can stand in front of a computer screen, it will scan you and it'll tell you what size you need. And you can then have it say, well, I'd like to see that suit in blue, or how about in gray? And all of a sudden it's on you and it's in those colors. Those things we've got now, and we're starting to take those things for granted. Those are just the tip of the iceberg as to what's coming. The innovations in customer solutioning are at their infancy right now. And one of the exciting things as we move forward with these technologies is for people to look at the skills they need, the type of career they want. Do you want to be involved in virtual reality? Do you want to be involved in holographics? Do you want that to be applied to medicine? What would you like? We're at the foundation of a new age in technology, and the people today have an opportunity to reskill and to move their careers in ways that have never been available before. And the bottom line on this is it all comes back to defining business operations and redefining them, because you can't invent things without companies. You can't evolve, you can't move forward without the structure that companies bring. The changes that RPA would be bringing to different operations with a variety of bots is amazing. And so the way that we can change our companies to further enable the use of these technologies to help people and to advance the human condition are something that we're at the very front end of. And the question then becomes, well, how do you really do this? How do you leverage these technologies? What do you need to change in the way that you used to do things? And we start to address those things in our books. Greg, can next slide. Continuing on with hyperautomation, what we see is that the tools started off in their infancy as independent tools. They were used separately. The next step was the vendors started to link them together. The third step was those vendors, many of them, the leading vendors, started to develop their own versions of, like BPM vendors would be putting in their own version of RPA tools, as an example. They're starting to essentially look at embedding AI tools with that. So we're starting to see platforms evolve where many of these tools are designed to work very closely with one another, which then in effect gives us a new set of capabilities. These capabilities deal with the close integration of what each of these tools is capable of doing. And we find that there is a foundation level from the things that we've done, the companies that we've helped. We look at a foundation level in BPM technologies. And the reason is these control the flow of activity across an organization or a process. Within those, you can now link to decision support applications, RPA applications, and the list goes on. It controls the execution and timing of that execution of each of these activities, or I should say the programs in each of these activities. What that then does is it allows you to deal with legacy systems also on a function by function basis and start to replace them function by function by function, and linking to them across application program interfaces, APIs. You can now have a very different way of architecting solutions. They're no longer, you pass something off from a computer to another computer, it tells you to do something, whatever. Now it's all integrated, and this passing and the way that these things works can become seamless, and we've designed solutions that'll help you do that. Okay, and At this point, I'm going to pass the presentation back to Keith. And Keith,
Thank you,
we'll
Dan.
talk about advanced technologies.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Dan. I want to step back for a moment and really think a little bit more about hypertransformation. And as Dan has been speaking, of course, we have hyperautomation and we have advanced technologies. And the space between them are increasingly blurred. When I think about RPA, cognitive computing, AI, we tend to think about those things as platforms or solutions. But by the same token, if we look at autonomous vehicles, sensors, telepresence, robotics, nanotechnology, all these are enabled by those very same hyperautomation platforms. Platforms like Watson, Google AI, Zor are all AI platforms, but they're required to make the advanced technology world work. So when we think about advanced technologies, not only are these capabilities, and some of these examples include sensors, robotics, for example, that are not just in factories surrounded by fences, but working now side by side with humans. 3D printing of an ever-growing number of objects, including biologics, all that is enabled by the technology platforms like AI behind it. So what's happening is we're starting to see organizations need to be rethinking their vision and strategy based on what capabilities from an advanced technology perspective exist, as well as how these very same technologies impact how the business organization or operation runs. So how do we use RPA to greater effect? How do we start to deploy robots that manipulate physical objects, not just standing on an assembly line, but can be multi-purposed? Those all start to cross the boundary between those strategic capabilities that I embed in my solutions or my products or services, or they embedded into my business processes and operations. And the answer is, guess what? It's both. And so as we look at processes, as we look at our business strategy, it's increasingly blurred. And that's why the space of hyperautomation becomes much more relevant. A really interesting example, if we think about Boston Dynamics, and I'm sure everybody has seen the dancing robots video on YouTube. But imagine taking Boston Dynamics robots, pairing them with a Ford van, which is an autonomous vehicle. So now what you have is you have a van driving up to your house, unloading an autonomous van, riding up to your house, unloading a robot that's now going to carry your Amazon delivery or a pizza for that matter to your front door, step back, take your picture, and confirm the delivery. How do I now take the same autonomous vehicle and use that as part of my business process? How do I use that to create a new business, customer experience? How do I leverage robots to not just build cars, but actually move products around in warehouses without any oversight? So the whole space around what we think about advanced technologies is not only accelerating, but it's creating all these fantastic opportunities for us to think about how we really design and enable our organization and create innovative ways to outpace and put distance between ourselves and our competition. All right, next slide is hypertransformation. Okay. A couple more words on hypertransformation. If one thinks back, organizations have been always managed on a 1 through 2, 3, even a 5-year planning horizon. However, with the massive disruptions that we've seen recently with COVID, as well as the accelerating pace of technologies, we no longer have the luxury of long planning cycles. In fact, planning now is defined not in years, but in months. And in cases of massive disruptions like COVID, organizations and their leaders had to scramble and think on a daily or even weekly basis, what do we need to do? How do we reprioritize? How do we get things done in a completely new world? Hypertransformation starts to unleash this capability by taking planning and action from long cycles to very, very short cycles. Because tomorrow we may wake up to a completely new reality with new challenges that we had not thought of before, and we need adaptive capabilities in our organizations. Otherwise, we're going to just slowly go away as an organization. As a result, organizations need to be continuously evaluating and reimagining their vision and strategy to take advantage of hyperautomation in terms of the products, services, and the solutions that are offered, as well as how the business operations and customer experience are delivered. We need to be adapting the overall business model and the IT operation based on hyperautomation capabilities, which we delve into in detail in the book. We need to invest in new capabilities that will be needed across the organization, not only on the business side, but also in IT. And then given that advancing technologies, including hyperautomation capabilities, are fluid and constantly changing, it's necessary for any transformation to result in a flexible operation that's capable of fast and continuous change. And this is where you all come in. As you get pulled into your organization's transformation efforts, it's vital to understand how hyperautomation is accelerating change and how hypertransformation is becoming a different and more effective way of thinking about and implementing business transformation. Thank you.
All right, Keith, thank you very much. And thank you, Dan, as well. At the beginning, I promised that we are going to provide everybody who's listening to this webcast a copy of Dan and Keith's brand new book. You can return to the webcast landing page in order to download the book there. But before we go, I've got some questions for Dan and Keith. I hope you'll stay around for those. And we've got a second gift for you, a digital badge at the end. And so as you were talking, guys, a few questions that I have for you. And I'm curious because I know you're involved with clients when you're not involved with writing the book. And congratulations on finishing that again. So I was curious whether you've seen any new approaches to business and or digital transformation that you consider game changers or something that you would tell our members about.
Well, Keith, why don't I start and you can jump in at any point. Most recently, I had a client that was redesigning their entire sales operation. And we helped them look at, first of all, what does that really mean? What in their business and in their marketplace, what was the sales activity all about? Some of it was internal, some of it was external. They had people that went out to see clients and to sell. And the question became, well, how do we help them? How do we let them know what they should talk to the client about specifically? Because, if you have multiple products, well, which ones are you going to talk to whom about, and what are you going to talk to them about as far as how they will be better than the competitions? And we looked at the emerging technologies and how we could redesign using them. And what we did was we looked at the types of things that could be found about clients and prospects. And we then looked at how we could route salespeople around effectively. That was all automated using GPS and some other things. And it was automated with a lot of AI and some cognitive in there. So it could say, when you get to this guy, this is your competition. This is what they're doing. And this is what you need to talk to them about. And this is what you need to tell them as far as why our products are better. And we then had a voice interaction. That was all voice. And as they would pull up to the client, they would just hear it. And then when they would leave the client or the prospect, they would then say, okay, here's what happened. Then we'd go back into the data bank. That was one way of looking at it. We also tied in compensation and a lot of different things. But we wound up having a base of BPM. We had RPA technologies doing some things for them. We had AI doing some things, and we had a little bit of cognitive in it, along with natural language processing. So the way of the future is one that frees people up from having to sit and type things in. You just really talk to the computer and you get the information that you need. And I think that that's pretty much the way that things are going to evolve in the future, Greg.
There's another client of ours, it's a financial services organization, and they're looking at their back office operations. And of course, there's always a push to say, how do we put more platforming, more RPA, more automation to drive efficiency and effectiveness, really a cost play in the back end of the business. And as we kind of work with them to step back and say, well, how do we think about continuous transformation? How do you think about hyper transformation? And come up with a more integrated view of applying these technologies in more effective ways to operations. Some key points that really emerged is the notion of how do we take the emerging hyperautomation tools and constantly have a test bed environment so that we can testing not only what they are and what they do, but then asking the question, what's the relevancy to my business? So rather than saying, hey, I've got AI, I'm going to go now use that as a hammer on a specific problem, we're really investigating, well, that AI app or that AI platform, what's it capable of? And how do we start to expand the boundaries of what's being defined? Because it may be applied in very different new ways than that vendor or others may even think possible. So that's the first thing. The second is the notion of rapid iteration and failure. Especially with the disruptions that we've seen in the past, there's been a resistance or reluctance to innovate towards failure. Failure has always been considered a negative or a risk, but when you think about many innovations, many breakthroughs, it requires massive iterations. And the key there is to do it quickly. So we keep testing, we try something new, move towards an 80-20 solution, put that into operation, and then keep iterating and pushing out solutions. This is a big migration for when we tend to see large solutions or platforms deployed where, I need to put a new CRM or other platform in, and it takes 2 years. We can't afford that time any longer. We need to see incremental improvements, rapid change in the organization, value being delivered to the business. And the final thing is integrating in the user experience to make sure that the people in our organizations, as they experience the change and have to adapt to new technologies, that we're doing the right things to invest in them so that they can learn and be participants in that new world and that new environment. And that tends to be considerably overlooked. We lack the time and energy to really invest in our people. And of course, we also have how we're investing to really understand what the customer experience is. Continuously when I'm dealing with organizations, especially on the customer service side, we have long hold times, we have broken processes, frustrating experiences, and yet they're great products on the other side. So if I can't download the manual to make my technology work, if I can't access with the solution I purchased to make it work properly, what's my experience from a user perspective? It's not just the use of it, it's how do I get to that maturity in terms of a user. So looking at things differently in terms of how we leverage technology in new ways, how do we start to appreciate and build failure and rapid iteration, true rapid iteration into our organizational models, and then how do we make sure that the journey, customer journey, employee journeys are really part of the conversation.
Greg, I'd like to add just one little thing into there,
Sure, Dan.
if I could. Dovetailing into what Keith said, one of the things that we need to look for in our organizations relative to digital transformation is the type of technology that we need. And this gets back to the use of AI, and we've got a tool, so what do we do with it? We would suggest rather, once you understand your business vision and the strategy to get there and the capabilities that you need, you can start to then define what you need your tool set to do and what types of automated tools that you need. And that way you can now strategically look at the types of technologies that you're going to buy, how those technologies are going to fit together, but you're going to buy that already having figured out how you want to use them and what they're going to be used for and what the ROI based with those tools really is going to give you. So it's a different thing than we have today, where business transformation and digital transformation are separate, and where, especially in digital transformation, people are looking for, well, that's the latest tool, and maybe we should get that and see what we can use it for. What we're proposing in Hypertransformation is looking at what your needs are and then building your environment around those needs so you can maximize the use and the benefit of any technologies that you're moving to.
Good point, Dan. And, we've talked about a lot of topics. We've talked about a lot of different technologies. Some folks, are just starting to explore some of those. Others are starting to walk quickly, and some folks are even beginning to run with some of these. But if we can switch gears for just a second, and before we run out of time here, I just wanted each of you maybe to speak to, what should readers expect to learn in the book? And what approach did you guys take when you laid out the sections of the book?
Let me take that, Dan, and then certainly add on to my thoughts. It's interesting. I look back over my career. I started off as an industrial engineer way back in the day, and really was schooled around process and operations and how do you build more efficient and effective businesses and business models. And over these decades, we've seen a lot of change, and we've all learned new tools and techniques, re-engineering, Lean, Six Sigma, Kaizen, GE Workout, just to name a few. And as we kind of look back, all these solutions work. They work really well, but we've learned them individually. We try and apply them as individual solutions to maximizing effectiveness in our businesses. And as Dan and I collaborated around this book, we really thought deeply around what needs to be different going forward. And it's not that these tools that we have applied in the past are not effective or relevant today. They absolutely are. But taking a much more integrated approach to how we think about our organizations, how we think about what we call the architects of transformation that I mentioned, the business, the process, the organizational, the experience, the technology architects, instead of having them work in silos on different piece parts of a puzzle or different piece parts of a portfolio of investments to drive towards transformation, how do we drive collaboration across that team so there's a shared understanding of what we're really trying to do to achieve not only a transformed organization, but an organization that continuously transforms. And so we pulled together a lot of content here for not only folks who are earlier in their careers to think about how do we embark and really add value as professionals into the transformation journeys of organizations, but those who are further into their careers or achieve senior leadership positions. These are conversations. This is how we are thinking about organizations today. This is how we're creating differentiation in terms of going to market and being able to leave our competition behind us by creating the disruptions, not reacting to them, by building adaptive organization structures that we don't have to go through constant reorgs and laying people off and whipsawing people back and forth. We've pulled together these concepts so that you all as leaders in your disciplines can think about how can we approach transformation in a different way and have a sustained change, as well as building change as a capability, a strategic capability in organizations. And so as we've gone through the book, we've talked about the context, the concepts, put them into the context of examples and cases and so forth. Then we provide you guys with a ton of tools and templates and guides so that you can be applying this to your work. So this isn't just conceptual work provided in the book, but it's a lot of tools that you can actually take and say, how do I do this? What's going to be different tomorrow to make me and my business more effective? Dan, what are your thoughts?
Well, a couple things that, first of all, the traditional approach to transformation focuses on cost reduction, and anything else is secondary. In the future, we're running into a need for investment. we're running into for a need to differentiate. That's the real opportunity that hyper automation and hypertransformation brings to the table. It's all about driving growth. Now, secondary, yes, we're going to save money, we're going to cut costs, we're going to do all of those things, but we're going to enable people. We look at training as critical. It's one of the things that right now there's about a 70% failure rate, according to internet statistics, on both business and automated products or projects. Well, that's not acceptable. So how do we get rid of that? And we started, to address those things. We started to address, as I mentioned when I was talking, how do we get rid of or replace our legacy applications? We found ways to do that in a cost-effective way. How can we change and change in a way that people can afford? We came up with, and we have used, an evolutionary approach where we look at business functions in a context, in a contextual model, so we know how everything fits together, and we can then rebuild in phases that are focused on high value, high return business functions. In the book, we talk about a lot of new concepts to the transformation industry, but they're all concepts that we've used on projects and have proven that they really work. So one thing that I'd like people to come away with is that in any business, nothing stands alone. Everything is interconnected. When you start to make changes, it's going to affect some other group, some other function, some other part of the operation. And that's why we're big on collaboration, because we look at potentially who's going to be affected, not only who's going to be involved and have their operation directly transform or directly change, but who's going to be affected by that. And so taking that holistic approach, we can meet expectations and we can do no harm to anybody else. So at the end of the transformation, whether it's at a department level, a process level, or larger level, the people are all happy, and everybody who is impacted knows exactly what's happening, why they're impacted, and how they need to respond to it.
All right, Dan, thank you so much. Well, guys, I've got one more ask before we wrap up today's webcast. I'm wondering if you can provide our members with the elevator pitch or the short description of hypertransformation if they get stopped in the hallway, or if they're on a Zoom session and other folks are asking them, what webcast did you listen to and what's this hypertransformation thing all about? What would you say to them?
I'll let you go first.
I would say, so hypertransformation is the blending of two fundamental things. One is, how do I think about transformation in the context of continuously driving transformation? We're not going from A to B and then evaluating how well did we do. We're going from A to B to C to D, and we're not stopping. We're not resting on our laurels. We're continuously transforming our organization, adapting, creating disruptions, and moving as fast forward as possible. Combine that with hyperautomation, which are the various platforms that we described, the advanced technologies that keep emerging, both of which influence how we think about not only the vision and strategy of organization, but the operating model and the business processes that we need to put in place to deliver results. So the notion of how do you continuously drive change, how you continuously drive transformation, coupled with drinking deeply from the latest innovations, determining how can I apply them to my organization, my products, services, and solutions, so that I can create the differentiation that's going to make sure that we grow our organization, rather than getting stuck, as Dan described, in a traditional cost-cutting model. Today, it's all about growth. It's all about market share. It's about outpacing our competition. Dan, what would you like to add to that?
Well, I think that there's a realization that senior people and really everyone in a company needs to come to. And that is, your company is going to change. It's been changing, it's never stopped changing. The question is, how are you going to do it? And what are you going to get once it's done? And we believe that in the past, we could have discrete transformation events because change wasn't that fast and wasn't that significant. Today, we don't have that luxury. Today, we have very significant change happening on a continuous basis. Recognizing that everything is interconnected, we then have to say, how do we control that change and how do we get to the fundamental, essentially, outcome that we're looking for? And that outcome is we have to be able to change any place in the organization quickly, effectively, with an efficient outcome that is low cost and low risk. And the only way that we know of to do that and is with the advanced technologies of hyperautomation, which do what they do because they have an underlying architecture that's very different than the traditional application language architectures. So we can do things that we can never do before, and we need to take advantage of that in order to hit those goals of rapid change, market acceptance, and essentially new ways to look at customers and to bring customers to us as opposed to them going to our competition.
Thank you so much, Dan. So Dan Morris and Keith Lewis, congratulations again, guys, on finalizing the book. It's a great conversation and one that I hope we'll be able to keep going. As we're starting to enter the summer, I just wanted to briefly mention to folks that our upcoming events, our entire schedule for 2021, we announced online virtual events for this year. The next one coming up will be in San Francisco at the end of June. All those sessions will be taking place at Pacific time. We're hoping that if things keep moving in the right direction with vaccines, that we'll get back to holding our face-to-face events, which we've done for over 20 years. But as of right now, this is the schedule that we've got for everybody, and we look forward to continuing the dialogue there. And as I promised, we also have a digital badge for everybody for attending this webcast. You can take a picture of that QR code with your cell phone, and that will create a complimentary account for you to house your digital badges, and you can share on social media as well. I also will share my email and phone number below in case you have questions on opportunities for training and education on the topics that we've covered today, as well as any of the other topics that we cover on the institutes. Feel free to reach out to me. We'd love to have a conversation and help support you and your team. Thank you very much, everybody. We look forward to hosting you at an upcoming webcast.